Go ahead and move good. You can sit there and read from the children's corner. There you go.
Sure. Right up here? We can take our mask off?
Yes. It would be very difficult. For those of you who are joining us on Facebook, we're going to do something a little bit different this evening. As I am studying through characters in the book of the Bible, I find it very hard to try to divorce them somewhat from the entire book, and I want to study each and every verse, and I just can't do that. So I'm not doing a very good job going through the characters of the Bible. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to do Esther in two parts. I wanted to read the book of Esther, because if I asked you all to read it beforehand, you most likely wouldn't. And if you don't know who Haman, Mordecai, Esther, and Ahasuerus is, the four main character, and even Vashti, a lot of it just won't make any sense as I go through the character. So one of the things that we see in the Bible is that we see people reading large blocks of scriptures and sometimes standing all day long. And that's one of the things that I do think that the church in general, not our church, not even just in the West, but the church in general, fails to do, is to read the Word of God. So my objective this evening is for us to open in prayer. We're going to read through the book of Esther. We won't have much time, if any time, to make much comment on it. And then next week, we'll comment on Esther. And Kathy asked, are we going to do Esther? And she says, yeah, I'd like to do Esther. And so I was like, yeah, we'll do Esther. And so as I'm going through and putting a lot of things together, which I have already completed, I'm like, this isn't going to make a lot of sense to a lot of people. So we're going to read this together. So in order to make this easier, I'm going to read the first chapter, and Elaine will read the second chapter, and Julie will read the second chapter, you the third. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, starting back over again. And if you notice in the book of Esther, if you're familiar with it, there's quite a few names in it that are a little difficult to say. But we're experts at it, and exactly the way that we say it is exactly the way it's supposed to be pronounced. Even with all my inflections and syllable breaks and the whole 9 yards. We've got good news this evening. I was trying to figure out how we can be more personable in prayer. And so, without violating any HIPAA laws, if we're praying for people and we pray by first name, we're perfectly good. They can make the connections themselves, but we're not divulging anything. So Jim's son is on his way home, which is wonderful. That's good news. I got news this afternoon through Sherry that Willa is doing well, and so she up and walking, and so she's doing well. And we just had a gentleman come to us just a little while ago, and he said that his mother-in-law is on the short list, that the Lord's coming to take her soon. Her name is Margaret, and he stopped and he asked if we would pray for her this evening, so we'll do that as well. So does anybody else have any prayers or praises? Adrena.
Francis said the tornado did not strike her area.
Okay, there's two of them, so I guess it didn't strike in the Panhandle somewhere.
Well, it was rumored to have gone down in Ransom.
Okay, I wasn't rumored about that. Maybe the hurricane didn't get news that it was supposed to head that direction.
I think according to the paper, something hit in that direction.
Yeah, it hit in Frederick, I think. Hey, Kathy?
Al's mom is 96. She's in a nursing home. She's not really eating or responding to much of anything. But at 96, she basically wants to rest. So I don't know when God will take her home. But I don't figure it's going to be too much longer.
And what's her first name?
Joyce.
Joyce. Okay, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, Lord, we see your goodness all about us. Your goodness far exceeds the dark things that do go on around us, even though that we do live in a broken and darkened world, and those things usually cloud out who you are. They usually distract us from seeing your goodness. Lord, I love this time of year. I love the greenery. I love the flowers. I just love the time of year where fruit starts to come on trees and plants, Lord. I see your handiwork in all of it. I thank you for the answered prayers for all those that have been lifted up for Hunter, Lord. He has suffered a lot, and I'm sure that he still is suffering. He's got quite a ways to go. But, Father, we just pray that you would give him quick and complete healing, Lord. As a young man, we don't want any residual effect due to the accident that he's had, Lord. So we just pray that you as the great physician would place your hand upon his body, that you would facilitate healing in such a way that would bring glory to you. Lord, I lift up to you Margaret as she is in her final days, Lord. There's indication that she knows you, Lord. I do not know her personally, so I don't know her circumstance. But the good thing is when we come to you in prayer for anybody, you know them intimately. You knitted them together in their mother's womb. And Father, you're not only a merciful God, you're a God of grace. And so we ask that you would oversee the transition of this life in just a wonderful way so that people can see your glory. We thank you for all those who have been spared by the hurricane, Lord. We know that there was a threat a day or so ago, and Lord, for some people, it's not a big deal. It's almost a spectator sport. And yet, Lord, for some of those who have great ailments, Lord, just the mobility of leaving a house in order to find shelter is a big deal. So we thank you for your grace in that situation as well. Father, as we look to your servant Esther, as you have called for whoever it was to pen these words to paper, Lord, that as we read it, that we would take in and see your glory as you're working through the main characters in order to protect your covenant that you have promised long ago and that you have fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ, that you will ultimately fulfill when Jesus comes to reign in Zion and take his rightful place on the throne of David. And so, Lord, be with us this evening as we turn to your word, for it is in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. So if you have Esther, turn to Esther chapter 1. Esther is one of the history books. And as I said before, I will start in verse 1 of chapter 1. Julie will start in chapter 2, and then Elaine will start in chapter 3. And we will read through the whole thing. Probably take us about 35 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. I already warned both ladies that I would be interrupting them periodically, which I just can't help. I'll be interrupting myself. So before we actually get started, I wrote a word up on the whiteboard, and the word is post-exilic. And the reason I wrote it up there is not because of big words or strange words. It's because it refers to a time period. And it refers specifically to and around this time period that Esther lived and God used her. Is anybody familiar with what the word post-exilic means? Compound word?
After the exile.
After the exile. So next week we'll talk about contemporaries. And it's simply a word that describes when God brought judgment upon the southern kingdom, and under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon conquered Jerusalem and put the Jews into exile, and then King Cyrus released them from exile and allowed them to go back home. So it's a lot easier to say post-exilic period than all what I'd said. So now in the days of Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. In those days when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, the citadel, in the 3rd year of the reign, he gave a feast for all of his officials and servants. The army of Persia and the Media and the nobles and governors of the province were before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. And when these days were completed, the king gave all of the people present in Susa, the city of Susa of Citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords and fine linen and purple to silver rods, and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. And drinking was according to the edict. There is no consumption, for the king had given orders to all the staff of the palace to do as each man desired. Let me back up. There is no compulsion, for the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. Now, what I want to just say right here is that you have to pay attention to the king of Persia right now. He is being very braggadocious. He is bragging about all of his accomplishments. And then we're going to see a man in just a little while. His name is going to be Haman. And he's kind of like wanting to be just like the king Ahasuerus. And he starts to brag as well. So this isn't a good king. He does end up doing some good things, but he only does some good things because of Queen Esther getting him in a position to be able to do those, or lead him to do those. And verse 10, and on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Muhammad, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Agabitha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of the king. Ahasuerus, who served in the presence of the king Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, delivered by the eunuchs. At this the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure towards all those who were versed in the law and judgment, the men next to him being Kashrina, Shethar, Adamoth, Tarshish, Meres, Marzina, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face and sat in the kingdom. According to the law, what is to be done with Vashti, because she has not performed the command of the king Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs? Then Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials, not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the peoples who were in the province of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will be made known to all the women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt, since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will say the same to all the king's officials, and there will be contempt and wrath in plenty. If it please the king, let the royal order go out from him, and let it be written along with the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before the king Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So when the decree was made by the king, is proclaimed throughout all of his kingdom, for it is vast, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. This advice pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan had proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in his own script, and to every people in its own language, that every man be master in his own household and speak according to the language of his people. Julie.
Ready. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's young men who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom together all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the capital, under the custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given them, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti.
Hold on just 1 minute. This needs to be pointed out in order to set up what's taking place. They are not playing the bachelor. These are not women vying for the state of being a queen of Persia. These are women that are good looking that happen to be in the outskirts of town who are being captured against their will and brought in. That is what's taking place here. So you need to know that as we're reading through this. Go ahead, verse 5.
This pleased the king, and he did so. And now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, away from Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Hegai, Esther also had been taken into the king's palace and put into the custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor. He quickly provided her cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and the young women to the best place in the harem. Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. Now when the turn came for the young women to go to King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was a regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil and myrrh, and 6 months with spices and ointments for women. When the young woman went in to the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem in custody of Shaagaz, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go to the king again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the women, advised. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into the royal palace in the 10th month, which is in the month of Tabeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. Now when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther had not made known her kindred or her people as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting in the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther. And Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows. And it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king.
Just 1 moment. One of the things that you need to know is that when Mordecai told Esther that the eunuchs had plotted against the king, Esther made sure that the king knew that Mordecai was the guy that told them the plot that was going on. That will come back later on as a favor towards Mordecai.
After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" And when they spoke to him day after day, and he would not listen to them, they told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is, they cast lots, before Haman day after day. And they cast it month after month till the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws. So that is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that they may put into it the king's treasuries." So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, "The money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you." Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict, according to all that Haman commanded, was written to the king's satraps and to the governors over the provinces and to the officials of all the peoples, to every province in its own script and every people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with instruction to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. The couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion.
When Mordecai learned that all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and he put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lie in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's young women and eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. And by the way, she did that in order for him not to be an affront to the king, because he's not supposed to be in the king's gate in sackcloth and ashes. Verse 5, then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasure for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her and command her to go to the king and beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. And Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants, and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except the one to whom he holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days or night. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him.
On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner courts of the king's palace in front of the king's quarters while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight, and he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter, and the king said to her, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even to the half of my kingdom. And Esther said, if it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly so that we may do as Esther has asked. So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, what is your wish? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled. Then Esther answered, my wish and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my wish and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said. And Haman went out that day, joyful and glad of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and brought his friends and his wife Zeresh, and Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, and all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king.
Give me just one quick moment. Do you notice that it's kind of the repeat of what the king Ahasuerus had already done at the very beginning? He had this lavish party. He showed everybody all the riches that he had. And here we have Haman doing the exact same thing. He feels all pumped up. He's got this special invitation coming from the queen herself. He's going to rub elbows with the king. He's got 10 kids. He's got this and he's got that and he's got everything else. So he's feeling really good right about now. Go ahead.
Then Haman said, even Queen Esther, let no one but me come with the king into the feast she prepared. And tomorrow also I am invited by her together with the king. Yet all this is worth nothing to me as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it. Then go joyfully with the king to the feast. This idea pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made.
On that night the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigtha and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, who guarded the threshold, and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the king said, what honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? The king's young men who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." And the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he was prepared for him. And the king's young men told him, "Haman is there, standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king said to him, "What should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor?" And Haman said to himself, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" And Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'" Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robes and the horse, as you have just said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned." So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai and led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, "Thus shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate. But Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. And Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is out of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him."
Did y'all pick that up? You ever had the rug just yanked right out from underneath you? Your heart's just swelling with pride. Haman, he is on easy street. Everybody's going to praise him. He thinks that the king's asking for advice for himself, and then he turns around and gives this lavish advice on all these wonderful things that the king should be doing for him. And of course, he's saying it veiledly, pretending as though that he doesn't know, which he really doesn't know. And the king says the very thing that you want done, make sure that it's done to Mordecai, the guy that you hate every day. Grab the horse by the halter and praise him in the middle of the street in front of everybody. So Haman's not doing really good right now. Chapter 7. Did you read 14?
No, I did not.
All right, I'll start 14. While they were yet talking with him, and the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. So the king and Haman went into the feast with Queen Esther. And on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, "What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom, and it shall be fulfilled." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king." Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he? And where is he? Who has dared to do this?" And Queen Esther said, "A foe, an enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. And the king rose in his wrath from the wine drinking and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw the harm was determined against him by the king. And the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine, as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. And the king said, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence in my own house?" As the word left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. Then Harboni, one of the eunuchs and attendants on the king, said, "Moreover, the gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, is standing at Haman's house 50 cubits high." And the king said, "Hang him on that." So they hanged Haman on the gallows and that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king abated.
On that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite and the plot which he had devised against the Jews. When the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, Esther rose and stood before the king, and she said, "If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if this thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the provinces of the king. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming to my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?" Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows, because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring, for an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked." The king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, and 23rd day, and an edict was written according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews to the satraps and the governors and the officials of the provinces, from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to each province in its own script, and to each people in its own language, and also to the Jews in their script and their language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, and sealed it with the king's signet ring. Then he sent the letters by mounted couriers riding on swift horses, that they were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud, saying that the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any armed force or any people or province that might attack them, children and women included, and to plunder their goods on one day throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. A copy of what was written was to be issued as a decree in every province, being publicly displayed to all peoples, and the Jews were to be ready on that day to take vengeance on their enemies. So the couriers mounted on their swift horses and were used in the king's service rode out hurriedly, urged by the king's command. And the decree was issued in Susa the citadel. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, and with a golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple. And the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city, wherever the king's command and his edict reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews, for fear of the Jews had fallen on them.
Now in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's command and edict were sent out to be carried out, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, the reverse occurred. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. The Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could stand against them, for the fear of them had fallen on all peoples. All the officials of the provinces and the satraps and the governors and the royal agents also helped the Jews, for the fear of Mordecai had fallen on them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces, for the man Mordecai grew more and more powerful. The Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and did as they pleased to those who hated them. In Susa, the citadel itself, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men, and also killed Parshandatha, and Dalphon, and Aspatha, and Paratha, and Adalia, and Radatha, and Parmasha, and Erdisai, and Eride, and Beathatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, and the enemy of the Jews, but they laid no hand on the plunder. That very day the number of those killed in Susa, the citadel, was reported to the king. And the king said to Queen Esther, in Susa, the citadel, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men, and also the 10 sons of Haman. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your wish? It shall be granted to you. And what further is your request? It shall be fulfilled. And Esther said, if it please the king, let the Jews who are in Susa be allowed tomorrow also to do according to this day's edict, and let the 10 sons of Haman be hanged on the gallows. So the king commanded this to be done. A decree was issued in Susa, and the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. The Jews who were in Susa gathered also on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they killed 300 men in Susa, but they laid no hands on the plunder. Now the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also gathered to defend their lives, and got relief from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of those who hated them, but they laid no hand on the plunder. This was the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested and made that a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were in Susa gathered on the 13th day, and on the 14th, and rested on the 15th day, making that a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages who live in the rural towns hold the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day for gladness and feasting, as a holiday, and as a day on which they send gifts of food to one another. And Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, obliging them to keep the 14th day of the month of Adar, and also the 15th day of the same year by year, as the days on which the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month that had been turned from them from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days for sending gifts of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews accepted what they had started to do, and what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast that is, cast lots, to crush and to destroy them. But when he came before the king, he gave orders in writing that this evil plan that he had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore they called these days Purim, after the term Pur. Therefore, because of all that was written in the letter, and of what they had faced in this matter, and of what had happened to them, the Jews firmly obligated themselves and their offspring and all who joined them, that without fail they would keep these 2 days according to what was written, and at that time appointed every year, that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, in every clan, province, and city, and that these days of Purim should never fall into the disuse among the Jews, nor should the commemoration of these days cease among the descendants. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the Mordecai the Jew, gave full written authority, confirming his second letter about Purim. Letters were sent to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, in words of peace and truth, that these days of Purim should be observed at their appointed seasons, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther obligated them, and as they had obligated themselves and their offspring, with regard to their fasts and their lamenting. The command of Esther confirmed these practices of Purim, and it was recorded in writing.
King Ahasuerus imposed tax on the land and on the coastland of the sea, and all the acts of his power and might and full account of his high honor of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was great among the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brothers. For he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all of his people. I'm going to speak about the book just for a couple of minutes. We're going to go ahead and dismiss early. And then I'm going to concentrate on Esther next week, and then probably get time to do another individual. So let's just look at something just real quickly in 9:26. The holiday is called Purim, and it came from Pur, which was spoken about earlier. Do you remember what Pur was in reference to earlier in the story? Actually, it was pretty early on in the story. I think it might have been chapter 1, might have been chapter 2. I certainly don't think it was chapter 3. But do you remember what Pur was? Why this holiday is called Purim or Purim? The casting of lots was called also Pur. They actually explained that early on. And so the reason that this is the holiday of the casting of lots is even though that the lots were cast, it came out into the favor of the Jewish people. And so they've adopted this holiday that was meant in order to destroy them as a holiday that God has intervened and saved them. And this is one of the holidays, I think I was telling Sherry before we came here, I know I was telling Neil about it, is that this is one of the Jewish holidays that I think that I could certainly celebrate annually, of God intervening through Esther in order to save God's people, because that directly, affects me. Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, I celebrate that through the person and work of Jesus Christ. He's the completion of that. But this here just seems like it'd be something worthy of celebration. And also, you'd have to think that Jews are really close to Southern Baptists, because during the whole holiday, they're just exchanging food among one another. I mean, that's what they do. Kathy?
When I was a bakery manager for Giant Food, we got in little pastries that were in the shape of Haman's hat.
How do we know what Haman's hat looks like?
Well, I don't know, but we had these little triangle things, and we had like prune filling.
Okay.
Yeah, so this all sounds familiar to me when I hear about her.
It does, but it's not a book that you regularly go to read. It doesn't necessarily go in with other studies.
How many years?
Huh?
It was just observed like less than a month ago.
I did not look and see what time. I'm sure if you Google it on your phone, it'll come up ASAP. What is striking about the Book of Esther? What is probably the most unusual thing about the Book of Esther of any other book of the Bible? And it's the only book that has this. I knew that you knew it. That's why I was kind of holding off. Julie.
God is not mentioned.
The word or the name God or Lord is not mentioned one time in the entire book. And so early on, when they were going through the canonization of books, which we talked about in our last study, some doubted that it belonged in here. There's no doubt in my mind that it belongs in this book. There's no doubt in my mind that God intervened. They're talking about fasting, and they're talking about praying. You don't have to mention the name God to know exactly who it is and what the people are and what they believe.
Well, what about the fact that it's the Jewish people, it was the way to save the Jewish people, and we all know that the Jewish people were God's people.
Right, that's why it's not necessary, and it's kind of I think it's a distraction to say, it don't belong in there because it doesn't even mention God. Well, it does. It just does not directly do that. I mean, we know throughout history that God intervenes in God's chosen people's lives. I mean, throughout history.
I think it was interesting that the way God used Esther, because you're not supposed to go before the king unless you're summoned to come. And yet she had the Jewish people fasting and praying because she knew she was going to go and present herself to the king, not knowing if he would extend it to her. So I just think that's an interesting part of the whole thing, that how many times did she find favor with the king?
Yeah, and sometimes those favors aren't really favors. I mean, it looks that way in English. It's not. I mean, he's not a good guy. But one of the things I want us to know that Esther was not Mordecai's puppet. Esther is, in her own right, God used her as the main instrument and shoved her center stage of the entire thing in order to save God's people. Mordecai's a major player. Let me see if we can get... Go ahead, Julie.
I just want to say, sadly, it doesn't mention prayer either. It mentions fasting, but it doesn't actually mention prayer.
Okay. I thought it said that. I just, as many times I read it, I should know that. Who are our main 5 characters in the Book of Esther?
Haman, Mordecai, Esther, and
Ahasuerus.
the king.
Who is Haman?
He's Ahasuerus' second.
Second in command. He weaseled his way up the ladder, and he thought he was going further. He did actually go all the way up the ladder, 50 cubits high.
It came crashing down.
Back in those days, they didn't do what was called long rope. Are you familiar with the difference between long rope and short rope hanging?
I have to admit, no.
Long rope hanging was developed in the mid-1800s, where they actually calculated the weight and the distance of the rope that they needed in order to break your neck so it would be merciful.
A sure thing, huh?
Prior to that, it was all short rope hanging.
Yeah.
You suffered for maybe an hour or so until you actually strangled to death. So questions, things that I know that I shouldn't know at all. So Mordecai, second in command. Ahasuerus also has another name which we could have used. And does anybody know what his second name is? It is Xerxes the First. We could have just said Xerxes the First. Xerxes the First. So he's the king. He's braggacious. He brags about all the things he has. He likes parties. He likes to wield powers. He is the one who confiscated numerous girls, put them in the harem. That's why I said this isn't The Bachelor. I mean, people do not want to be imprisoned and only summoned as a toy when they want to be, and this is what she experienced. And Mordecai, and here's an interesting part. Let's see if we can go there. I think it's chapter 2, around verse 7. Come on, Clayton. It is 2:5. Now, listen to this. Now, there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. He stands in the royal lineage of first King Saul. So that makes him by default, that makes Esther by default what?
The lineage of Jesus.
Stands in royal lineage to the very first king of the nation of Israel. Because how is she related to Mordecai? No. Not her uncle. It's her cousin. It's her cousin. And anybody got any questions? So we talked about Haman, the second command. We talked about Xerxes the First, which I was going to reference him the rest of the time from here on out. And Mordecai, who was basically a nobody, and he was not willing to be pushed around by anybody. Even Queen Esther was like, when she found out that he's going around in sackcloth and ashes in the king's gate, which was forbidden, send these out and put them on him. Mordecai says, let everybody see the way that I'm warning them. We're all going to die. I think Mordecai's mentality was, we need to do something because we're going to die anyhow. And Esther wasn't quite as on board, and that's why she commanded everybody to fast for this 3-day time period. And then she came to the point where, what did she say? If I go before the king, if he doesn't accept the scepter, if I die, I die. So she come to terms with that as well.
What about the name that you said that
Vashti,
No, not the queen.
Xerxes the first.
Yeah, how come that's not mentioned?
It should be. It really should. We should just take an eraser and get rid of that because
It's not the Hebrew name. What we're reading is the Hebrew name. Rather than
I don't know if that's the Persian name or not. If it's in your notes, I agree with it. I have not looked that up.
Yeah.
And so we had Queen Vashti, and what was her problem?
She's, well, she thought more of herself than what she actually had.
She's an independent woman that wouldn't do what somebody told her to do.
I think that,
Did they kill her?
no, it doesn't. I tried to make that connection. It didn't even allude to it. It's just that she was never commanded to come in front of the presence before, but she was not actually killed. And it does seem to be that as Ahasuerus had a sober moment afterwards, that last comment that he made towards Vashti, that there seemed to be a little bit of a remorse of acting so quickly on, dismissing her.
How come Vashti didn't have any power to do anything about Esther being selected? How come there wasn't?
Because they already signed a law. They signed a law that she is now out. They kicked her to the curb. And I wouldn't say
It
what.
was more the nobles wanted to make sure versus the king, because the nobles were afraid that their wives would be doing the same thing she did.
Yeah, that's why I was kind of hoping Ron would be here, because he would probably be all over this right now. Look what these women were trying to do. I mean, they were trying to stand up and tell the husbands what they were going to do and so on and so forth. So you did pick up that right, that the men were concerned with the women rising up. And
That was loud and clear.
Vashti did rise up, but I don't think that what you said that she thought more of herself. I thought that she just
Well, she
grabbed
thought
an
she-
ounce of dignity.
Well, dignity, but also I think she thought she had more power over the king than what she had. I mean, I think she had been, because she was so beautiful and so highly thought of, and he had fallen over her, that she thought he would keep on doing so, that she could say anything she wanted, and he wouldn't. But he probably would have recanted, except for the fact that nobles were afraid that their wives and everything would hop on board, and there'd be, all these women in the
So it got political quick.
feminism would strike come early.
I don't know if she thought that she had more political clout or persuasion. The only reason I say that is because the king has a woman for every occasion, every night. Esther certainly was fearful to approach him. Maybe, maybe not. I just think that she just got sick and tired of it. Because what was the purpose for King Ahasuerus to summon Vashti before him? Do you remember what the purpose was?
show her off.
Yeah, because she's beautiful. And also when it talked about Esther, it said that not only was she beautiful, but she had a nice figure. So I believe that the whole purpose of parading Vashti before all the men is actually that he was going to do that naked. I believe so. Don't know that for certain, but I don't think that's outside the realm of possibilities. So next week we'll talk about Esther in particular. At least we know the 5 main characters. Vashti will probably not be mentioned anymore. Ahasuerus will be referred to as Xerxes from here on out. Just because I can't say that in the evenings. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, a holiday, Purim, the casting of lots. When we see that in the book of Jonah, they knew that you were in all the details. There was nothing that escaped your notice, that you were sovereign over all things. Lord, evil, wicked Haman casted lots and thought it came out in his favor, and it actually turned out to be the opposite of that. We thank you for the preservation of the Jewish people, because without it we would not have King Jesus. Without it we would have no salvation. So Lord, as the Jewish people celebrated this, Lord, I just hope that I can remember this holiday from year to year and think about how you've used Esther and Mordecai in order to save your people. and to just see you walking through the scriptures. Lord, for those who laud this as not being something that is worthy of being scripture, they don't know you. They can't see you working behind the scenes. Lord, I don't even see you working behind the scenes in this. I see you working on the forefront of this in order to accomplish your purpose, to keep your promises. So, Lord, may we draw strength from your words and for your promises and from what you do. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Julie and Elaine, for.
Yes, thank you, Julie and Elaine.
It really was nice to have the change of voice to get all the way through.
Well, that...